Now, ordinarily, I don't like incendiary titles to articles that are about subjects that are complex and require nuanced conversation and ought to be approached thoughtfully, rationally, etc. However, today I'm going to make an exception with this article. Critical race theory aims to murder the souls of white children. Yes, it is an incendiary title, but I think when we go through it, you will understand why I'm making an exception and arguing this title is appropriate. First, though, I want to introduce you to the author of the piece. I think it's very important to consider the sources of our information. Okay, I think most of you would probably agree with that. That does not mean I would ever write something off because of a source. It just means I think if somebody is writing from a perspective that adds credibility or detracts from credibility, it's worth noting before you read the piece. It's another piece of information that helps you decide how to consider the opinions you're about to consume. Shouldn't be dispositive, but it should help you frame it. That's my opinion. Your mileage may vary. So this is Jason Hill. He's an honors distinguished professor of philosophy at DePaul University in Chicago. His areas of specialization include ethics, social and political philosophy, American foreign policy, cosmopolitanism, and race theory. He's the author of several books, including We Have Overcome, An Immigrant's Letter to the American People. All right, so with that, having said that, all right, let's take a look at his piece. And again, I've already prefaced this by saying I agree with it. I agree with him. So you know, before we go through this, where I'm coming from, and you can agree or disagree or whatever. But I think that Professor Hill is spot on. CRT aims to annihilate the souls of white people, to morally paralyze them via a protracted process of induced guilt, shame, embarrassment, and extortion. Now, whether or not you think of a soul in religious terms, I think we have a soul as human beings. And as I go through this, I think you'll understand why I say that. A friend of mine told me a true apocryphal story. He's an old-fashioned liberal and a strong advocate of public education. The COVID-19 lockdowns left him additional time to inconspicuously sit in on his 6th grade son's online classes. One afternoon, he observed an assignment in an English class in which all the white students were required to place their arms beside a brown paper bag. The teacher, a white woman, asked if they noticed a difference in color between their skin and the brown paper bag. The white students verbally assented. The teacher then asked if the color of the bag looked close to the skin color of some of the classmates who identify as black. The teacher then announced, if your skin color is different from the color of the paper bag, then you are part of an American problem known as systemic racism that does irreparable harm to all black and brown people. Further, if you identify as white, you enjoy something called white privilege, which means you are practicing racism every day without knowing it. The teacher then went on to ask the class if they ever heard the term reparations. Out of some sense of visceral paternal protection, my friend slammed down his son's computer and told him to go to his room. He told me that he stood there shaking with incredulity. This is called murdering someone's soul. I told him his son was being held hostage by a new national philosophy called critical race theory, a moral eugenics program. His son was being re-socialized to be an enemy of his family, himself, and the state. The murder of his son's soul was taking place before his eyes. At age 12, this young man had committed no egregious harm against any black person, yet he was being taught to feel that he was the cause of all harms inflicted on black people. His son, I said, would grow to feel resentment towards blacks and self-hatred. By the power of his whiteness, he could cause much harm, yet also alleviate blacks' misery and suffering. He would be made to feel like a monster for holding that power. Simultaneously, he would be made to feel like the devil for not exercising his power to rectify every asymmetry between blacks and whites, regardless of whether the disparities were caused by racism. It would not be enough for him to not be racist. He would have to prove that he was also an anti-racist. This child's curriculum would continue to include a phalanx of progressive nihilists who would call for the annihilation of whiteness, which his mind would come to understand as the annihilation of all white people, including himself. I told my friend his son ran the risk of not only becoming a racist, but a self-hating white supremacist. He could come to believe that becoming a white supremacist would be his only default position from which to protect his life from this assault. Whatever you call this, it's evil. Many practitioners of critical race theory would like us to believe they are not part of the moral eugenics program suffusing the learning domains from K-12 to universities. Yet the calls to abolish whiteness expurgate courses of all European thinkers, and the attacks against free speech are part of their agenda. They call for equity, which means equality of outcomes plus reparations, inclusion, which is restricted speech, banning anything some find offensive, and diversity, which is a violation of individual identity and enforced intellectual conformity. Cultural competence and relevance means catering to stereotypes of identity groups that result in a blank check to inform people they are not culturally aware and that they must modify their behavior. They believe dissent is proof of racial bigotry. This is a form of mass indoctrination. These are the strategies to indoctrinate people into critical race theory, CRT. Critical race theory is scaring people stiff. I taught CRT as a graduate student while pursuing my PhD more than 25 years ago. I can say confidently that, like any idea pathogen, CRT has morphed several mutant variants. People from Ta-Nehisi Coates to Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo promulgate a variant of CRT. They insist people of European descent make society racist for their own benefit. They insist racism is systemic and that it is present even if no one is racist. They claim all disparities in group outcomes are due to racist systems. The application of these iterations of CRT has a lot of people scared. A former vice president at JP Morgan told me his company had given millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter, which spouts CRT language to bolster its claims. So that when the massacres come, the people in charge there hope they'll be the last to be shredded, or at best they might obtain a point of entry to negotiate for their lives. I cannot walk anywhere in several cities in any American neighborhood without seeing a BLM poster etched in store windows. I'm hard-pressed to believe that folks who run such enterprises really support the radically pro-Marxist, socialist, communist axis of BLM. Americans are experiencing real fear and intimidation. It is fear that a war is brewing. When the mobs return to again loot and burn down our cities and wage an economic insurrection inside our republic, some folks hope they can escape the carnage with bribes. Nuclear weaponizing shame. The goals of CRT are to annihilate the souls of white people, to morally paralyze them by a protracted process of induced guilt, shame, embarrassment, and extortion. The call to abolish whiteness, a staple now of whiteness studies, CRT, and all social justice programs in our schools, is a euphemistic moniker, a death metaphor with a wide berth. CRT promotes its death agenda by handing your soul over to any race pimp and hustler who uses his body and feelings arguments against the pigmentation of your own skin. It is a racial extinction plan. It is the final solution of people who recuse themselves from a significant portion of humanity, making themselves into misanthropes. Our new national philosophy deploys moral relativism and the suppression of dissent by criminalizing reason and logic as proper adjudicators of truth claims. To hate yourself for being white, even if such an ascriptive identity might mean nothing to you personally, is in the end to get you to dehumanize your life. If they can accuse young white children of spirit murdering black children, as is a popular canard of CRT, then children will end up thinking that their values and thinking, none of which can be redistributed, are the products of their original sin, not their virtues. The end goal of this is collectivist tyranny. They whose souls are being nationalized right now in our institutions will be the manufacturers of socialism and communism. Racially scapegoated and expected to atone for every social and economic disparity between themselves and blacks, they will be convinced communism is the grand elixir for all the maladies they and their ancestors inflicted upon a competitor race. Until people realize that CRT is an extinction doctrine with the sole goal of stripping every white person of every defense they have to protect their self-esteem, agency, and free will, they will be prey for every American-hating, Marxist-loving social ballast masquerading as an agent of change for the good. A sixth grader can feel self-doubt when told such things because of lack of an emergent identity that can track his successes in the world against forces that would seek to obliterate it. That child's self-esteem can be destroyed by telling him that by a process of chemical predestination, he genetically harbors the seeds of an oppressor. He is the carrier of a genetic pathogen, whiteness. This whiteness is deterministic and destructive of others' agency. He must democratize his natural and cultivated talents that others do not possess. He must at some point see merit as a con game his ancestors built to keep blacks outside the domain of universal inclusion. Is it any wonder that I, as a college professor of 24 years, observe students enter college convinced that the universe is stacked against them and that college life a useless holding pen that will further suck whatever joy and vitality for life they might once have possessed when they knew who they were before the nefarious CRT told them who they had to be. These children suffer from the trauma of being subjected to social eugenics that encourage them to feel hatred for themselves based on the color of their skin. This is our republic, and these are our children, regardless of color. It's time to rescue them from the soul killers obsessed with remaking them into clones for the creation of an America few of us want to live in. The world they desire can be won. It is up to us to slay the dragons and regift the children their beautiful souls. What do you mean by soul, Deb? Well, a soul is that part of you that makes you human, is what supposedly separates us from animals and plants and inanimate objects. It is that part of us that is transcendent. It is that part of us that makes us capable of virtue. And when you strip away another person's humanity intentionally, when you demonize them, when you encourage them to self-loathe, or conversely, when you encourage them to hate others because they're creating this pain, you strip away that part that makes them human. You have literally dehumanized them. They have no need of real virtue in their minds. They are just going to be in survival mode like animals. So, when I and others tell you they're teaching CRT, this is what we're talking about. No, they are not teaching children the writings of Derek Bell, or even Kimberly Crenshaw for that matter. They are teaching Max Kendi. They are teaching BLM in the classroom. They are teaching 1619 Project, all of which are poisonous fruit of this same tree of critical theory. Critical theory basically saying what Professor Hill is saying, that all white people are guilty, that all disparities are because of racism, even if no racist individually was involved, that these children will never be innocent. They can never do enough. Can you imagine being a small child and that has been said to you? Can you imagine being that kid in that class, asked to compare your skin to a paper bag, and then being told that you are guilty? If this were a church and people were using this kind of fire and brimstone language to tell small children they are guilty of a sin they can never atone for, we would call that child abuse. We would be appalled. But because it's school, we somehow overlook it, or are encouraged to overlook it, or are told that it is part of some higher goal of achieving equity. And then we don't question what equity is, which of course is equal outcomes, Harrison Bergeron style. But of course we can't have equal outcomes, and everybody knows it. So the only way to achieve real justice is to do away with those inhuman creatures who are so guilty and whose very existence propagates racism. And that is to do away with white people. And if this sounds insane, it's because it is insane. It's psychopathic. The backlash from this can and likely will be ugly. And it will go in both directions. You will see higher rates of suicide most likely, and you will see higher rates of racism. So, I don't know why anyone would want to expose their children to this kind of abuse. To me, it's unconscionable. So there you have it. There's the article. Make of it what you will, but I am going to do one more Tom MacDonald reaction video shortly. And part of the reason the video I'm going to do tugs at my heartstrings so much is that I think it's the song going through my mind when I'm reading this article. And yes, it won't be an organic reaction. I had to watch it first because I had to make sure it was suitable for my channel, first of all, because this is an education channel primarily. But I also wanted to make sure I was reacting thoughtfully, because there are some pretty deep, heavy ideas in that song, and that is White Boy. So look for that coming up soon. But I'm going to do it because, as I said, it is the soundtrack in my mind to this article. And it breaks my heart. And I really actually have to kind of choke back emotions when I listen to the song and when I read a piece like this. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. Our children, our entire society is in grave danger. So the children are in danger and the society is in danger because the children are in danger. Please take that into account. And if you find this helpful in any way, I hope you will like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. See you at the next one.